Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're going to give this a minute or so before we kick off to give everybody a chance to join us. Looks like we have a nice crowd today. I think we picked a popular topic, JJ.
I think so too. This will be well attended.
Mm-hmm.
Can't go through a day without debating and discussing this.
We're hearing it on the news.
Absolutely.
The breach of the day. All right, so we're going to go ahead and kick this off here and let the remaining people straggle in as they can. So my name is Alan Bauman. I'm one of the founding partners of CompuWorks, and happy to welcome you all here today. If you guys don't know who CompuWorks is, we're a managed IT service provider. It's our 35th year in business. We're very much immersed in the world of cybersecurity and helping our clients stay as secure as they can. And I'm joined here by our co-host today, JJ Filio, who is the president of Berkshire Fairfield. It's great to be doing this with you, JJ.
Yeah, thanks, Al. I really appreciate this opportunity. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Again, I'm JJ Filio. I'm the president and founder of Berkshire Fairfield Insurance Agency. We're a Berkshire County-based commercial insurance and risk management firm, for those of you who haven't heard of us. This critical topic really requires an abundance of attention and action. In my opinion, the velocity in which, what I call is the burden of advanced knowledge for us all, meaning you have to know more about cyber tomorrow than you did yesterday before it's too late. This burden is being pushed to business owners, middle-level managers, board-level executives, and in many cases to interns and employees that don't have risk management experience. The burden increases and is increasing exponentially at a far too quick rate, in my opinion. And then the confluence of so many technology improvements, coupled with these advanced digital risks, coupled with mitigation solutions, coupled with the government support, engagement and education initiatives. And candidly, it's what all of this is bringing us together here today to try and condense a worldly amount of information into a very, very small session. So it's a privilege for me every day to be able to collaborate with many of you who are on this call today, as well as with experts in the fields of risk management. We see ourselves as quarterbacks for our clients and the community. We really are focused on delivering the highest level of skills and resources to the community, especially as it relates to growing and emerging risk and insurance strategies. So when I think about combining our leadership and bench strength with leading edge partners like CompuWorks, Dual Insurance Company, Threat Locker, and our very own FBI, I believe it's an hour worth investing for us all in an attempt to raise all of our fluency in today's critical world of cyber risk.
Yeah, I mean, cyber security is obviously a conversation that both you and I have with our clients all the time, JJ. We come at it from different perspectives, but obviously the world has changed in the past few years in particular. And I think we're going to hear some of that from Doug and from the others here on the panel. Lots has changed here in the cybersecurity world. So super important topic. I know you have conversations with your folks about cyber insurance, protecting risks, managing risks. I'm sure that's a big topic with you too.
Oh, absolutely. At the end of the day, the federal government has pushed it off to the states to manage privacy notification law. And many folks, business owners today, don't necessarily understand what their obligations are in the event of a cyber breach. So, today really is kind of bringing, all the parties together, whether it be an insurance broker, a managed service provider, an insurance carrier, the FBI, and other, services that support, these emerging threats and needs. And so helping you understand, what the next steps are, moving forward in the event that you are breached or hacked is going to be something you can walk away from today.
All right, so we've got a lot of content here. You guys seeing my screen, JJ? You're seeing my screen here?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so just a real quick introduction to the panel. We're going to do a more proper introduction before each of them presents. But we're very happy to here to have Doug Doman from the FBI as a special agent with the FBI Boston Cyber Task Force. He's going to give us the FBI's perspective on the current state of affairs with respect to cybersecurity. Also very happy to have Larry Baldino, President Cyber Technology and Professional Liability at Dual North America, is going to give us his perspective on cyber insurance and what's going on with that. I can tell you there's a lot going on with that, so I think we should all be interested in that conversation. And then finishing it up, and this is something I'm personally very excited to hear about or hear more about. We actually know quite a bit about this, but we have Danny Jenkins here, who's the CEO and co-founder of a company called ThreatLocker, who produces some software which we really feel is game-changing in terms of protecting all of our companies from the cyber threats that are out there. So in terms of an agenda, it kind of follows that flow. Doug's going to be up first to give us sort of his perspective on things. Larry's going to talk about managing risk with cyber insurance, and then we're going to talk about Danny's product, which is based on zero trust, something called zero trust technology. And if you're not familiar with what that is, Danny is certainly going to fill you in on that. We also have some time, plenty of time here for questions. We do expect, to have a lot of questions here. When you do have questions, use the Q&A button, the Zoom Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit those. It's the easiest way for us to manage that. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So without sort of further ado here, I'm going to introduce Doug Doman. Doug has been an FBI special agent for over 20 years. He's currently assigned to the FBI Boston Cyber Task Force and Criminal Computer Intrusion Squad. Since 2016, Doug has worked on the computer intrusion matters focused exclusively on criminal actors. He also has his MS in cybersecurity, policy, and governance from Boston College. Welcome, Doug. Really happy to have you here today.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here and speaking with you all. And hopefully there's some things that the viewers take away that they can help defend their own networks with. If it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
Yep, go ahead.
You might, there you go. So thanks for the intro. I've been with the FBI for 20 years. I'm now the supervisor of the task force here in Boston. We cover 4 states. So with the 8 agents that we have, we are covering Maine, Mass, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. One of the things that I often tell people is that when I first got in the FBI, I would come to someone with the problem as I was trying to learn the job, and they would kind of put 2 hands up in front of themselves and say, "Look, I'm not really a cyber guy, so I'm not qualified to answer the question or to help you down the road." And what I've learned is that really hasn't changed much in my 20 years. And I think here in Boston, I force my colleagues to just dig in and figure out what they can and to learn and not be afraid of the topic. So the fact that everyone's here trying to learn about some of this, the threat landscape, I think is a benefit and goes to show that everyone's willing to learn. I certainly don't know everything. I've been focused on the criminal investigations of the hacking cases. So as far as the other experts on the panel, I'll defer to you with questions that come down my way with regards to that. But to get kind of level set everyone on the FBI, we have 56 field offices that are spread out throughout the country. We're also global. So we have offices and embassies throughout the world. There's 80 overseas offices. As I mentioned, we cover 4 states, and for our cyber investigations group, we have a national security squad and a criminal computer intrusion squad. And what that means is you've heard the term Apt Threat from years back. And that's going to be a state-sponsored attacker who's coming in to try to obtain, whether it's research and development or state secrets, depending on what access you may just use your PII that's of interest to that nation state. There is nothing that the victim that I speak with, nothing they want more than to be able to tell their board of directors or their executive management that this is a state-sponsored attack, because they're very sophisticated. The resources behind those attacks are essentially unlimited because they're coming from an overseas or foreign government. And that's generally not the volume that we see is mostly criminal activity, or at least on the onset, it's criminal activity, being, attacks that are being launched from criminal infrastructure that oftentimes we may either know about or have visibility on in the various networks that we're have open investigations on. So we do separate it in that way. It gives us different authorities that we can use in the various cases. It also kind of helps us to focus on what I think are really the first line defenders of a network, and particularly with the municipalities where we have state police that are essentially owners of that network, whether it's a municipality here in the Boston area or out in Western Massachusetts. Our troopers are really the ones that are kind of leading the effort for the incident response. As any victim, there's concerns about involving outside counsel to maintain a client attorney privilege, which we understand. But for the most part, we've learned that connecting with the state police and the locals are really the best way that we can push the message out and investigate and collect the evidence for federal prosecution. In Boston, we follow the task force model, which is started with the JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, decades ago. The cyber task forces were kind of pushed out into the country to follow that same model. And on the criminal side, we focus more with and work much more with local and state and other federal law enforcement partners to put those cases together. And then, as you'd imagine, in the national security squad, they're going to be dealing with the U.S. intelligence community and handling matters that are of counterintelligence focused investigations, and again, those state-sponsored attacks that have maybe a different group of stakeholders than we do here on the criminal side. But here we've got Department of Education, OIG, state troopers from New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. We've got Federal Protective Service, as well as Boston Regional Intel Center, who are recent, are just coming on board now. We also have a quarterly law enforcement working group that we sit down and talk with our partners, Secret Service, Homeland Security investigations, to try to maintain kind of a consistency across the board. We do a lot of the same work. What we tell people is if you're working with an agent or a law enforcement officer, and you have a good faith that that person is knowledgeable and has some traction with regards to getting cases moved, then we encourage you to stay with that person. It doesn't matter really if you call the FBI or Secret Service. At the end of the day, we're all kind of bringing those cases to the same prosecutors at the Department of Justice to get charged, and often cooperate and learn from each other along the way. One of the things I wanted to make sure to provide is that we get asked a lot about our intelligence. Like, what are we pushing out? What kind of indicators can we push to the private sector to help defend our networks? And what we realized about 10 years ago is that we were not doing a good enough job of pushing out simple atomic indicators like IPs and domains that we could identify in our investigations, and we could proactively help protect other networks out there. The reason being, and the reason why it continues to be not a struggle, but just a long process, and oftentimes doesn't land in the laps of network defenders in a time that is quick. We have to get a kind of a check off from all the stakeholders with those indicators. So if a victim contacts us and we take images and collect the kind of the attack vector or we identify the attack vector, and we're able to see where that IP address came from, or maybe where that domain was beaconing out, where the malware was beaconing out to, the domain that was identified. We have to first make sure that the victim was okay with it, because we wouldn't do anything without the victim being advised of that. And then we also have to deconflict with our partners at all those levels I mentioned, to make sure that we're not going to compromise an ongoing investigation by pushing this out and then detecting it. And then now those bad actors who we may have been watching in another field office or another agency, now they know that we've identified their infrastructure and they're moving to something different. So we have to make those decisions. We are always victim focused, and more so than not, we will push out information regardless of what case we're trying to protect. And this is the mechanism in which we do it, through our private industry notifications and through our FBI flash messages. For those interested in receiving those, you can email that email at the bottom of the screen there, cyber_outreach@fbi.gov. That's an email that we'll review on a case-by-case basis. Any of the anyone that is interested in the information, you have to do it from a work email. So you can't email from a Gmail or an Outlook.com. It's got to come from a legitimate source, and you've got to explain kind of what your role is in your position. So that's the way that you request that. So I mentioned the anecdote about coming into the Bureau 20 years ago, and people kind of shying away from cyber because maybe they weren't engineers or didn't know what an IP address was. We also were kind of faced with this term cyber, which is a term now used ubiquitous out in media and as we talk, and our company names are refer to cyber. And I've always been interested in where that word comes from, which is actually a fiction from the 1960s. But our squad is called the Cyber Task Force, and that is something that I like to kind of first get on the same terms with regards to attacks that are referred to us, because we will get calls from individuals who are just socially engineered. They got tricked into providing some credentials to a bad guy. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we've also got a computer that might have been used in a investigation, which was only really a communications device. It was a phone, and that communications device was calling another bad guy, and they were making a drug deal. That's just because that investigator has a phone doesn't mean that it's a cyber investigation. And most everyone here understands that. But with regards to what we're doing, we're specifically focused on internet-based attacks. And the way that the statute's written is that it has to be, the attacker has to gain unauthorized access and essentially steal something of value, steal a state secret or a US government information, or they need to create an environment where that is going to create some violence or a threat to life situation. So those three things are what we're always looking for, which, oftentimes, this is obviously an attack that we investigated. We just recently convicted the only individual who was actually prosecuted for the crime, even though it was a group of folks. This was a 2016 attack on the Dyne DNS provider up in New Hampshire. The entire eastern seaboard's internet went down. These are some providers that were impacted because they were customers of Dyne, but this attack initially was meant to bring down the PlayStation network because the attackers that were conducting it were upset with some of their friends online. They wanted to take down PlayStation to show them that they could control their video game experience, and in doing so created a massive loss for PlayStation, who conducts business online and relies on that as a revenue stream. But also all these providers that were impacted for a couple hours that morning. At the time, there was a terabyte per second volume of attack with the Mirai botnet, which is what they used to bring down the Dyne DNS services. Again, it was a secondary kind of a derivative result of them attacking PlayStation. All that traffic went through Dyne's servers to load balance their DNS traffic, and in doing so brought down Dyne itself. So that Mirai botnet was an Internet of Things botnet, which is still an issue, which we often will go to we're in Chelsea, Mass, so there's a train that's going by here, so we always have this problem. But essentially, with regards to the DDoS attack, the Mirai botnet collected and herded bots that were essentially Internet of Things devices that had been compromised by the malware, and they loaded the botnet software and all these, I'm going to call them kids, although one was not. All they had to do is essentially write one command and send 70,000 bots to PlayStation Network, and in doing so created a huge problem for many companies. How would you defend yourself against something like this? You would get a service level agreement with your upstream provider, and you would get DDoS mitigation private services to help identify those signatures of the DDoS traffic and mitigate or black hole that traffic coming in. Additionally, the only reason we were able to charge this case was because Dyn collected PCAP. They had a certain amount of PCAP that they were collecting on a 24-hour basis. So when we spoke to them, they had already identified a signature within the DDoS attack that your ordinary organization is probably going to be unable to do unless they have a really exceptional security team. So as you're building your detection controls and trying to understand where your choke points are and what we're going to look at and maintain for logging, if there are no logs, then we don't have any evidence. And in this case, they had great evidence for us, and they also kind of worked with us to identify the signatures and determine, what our leads were going forward. Our director is actively engaged in cybercrime. We are lucky enough to have him in Boston every year to be the keynote at our Boston conference on cybersecurity that we co-sponsor at Boston College. Cybercrime, and I use that term very broadly to include our national security colleagues, is a third priority of the FBI behind preventing the next terrorist attack and our counterintelligence mission. So our cases can go all the way to the top when we're involved, depending on the circumstances. Our director was not the first director, however, to get involved in kind of knee deep in cybercrime. This hearing I found on C-SPAN. I don't usually watch C-SPAN, but I had found this to as a result of reading the book The Cuckoo's Egg. This committee on the judiciary had a subcommittee on technology and law, and they had the director of the FBI as well as the author of that book, The Cuckoo's Egg. His name's Cliff Stoll. They had both of them testify to explain, how are we going to defend ourselves? How should the legislation be written so that we can make sure that the bad guys are punished, but also make sure that we're not stifling creativity and research that's being conducted in the community. And I always remind people, cyber crime is not a new problem. This has been around for decades. We are still evolving and adapting to the technology. Unfortunately, it's costing folks a lot of money. The biggest threat, without question, is ransomware right now. We are kind of on had a little bit quieter summer than we did last year, but I think that's a result of companies getting wise to how they're going to respond to ransomware attacks. Initially, in the probably mid 2019, we started to get a lot of calls from ransomware victims that were saying they didn't have a plan. They said, we have really no idea what to do. Everything's locked up. We outsource all of our technology. They're on site, but no one knows what to do. So where do we go from here? And we learned pretty quick that we can't scale our, what would be called an incident response kind of package. We can't scale that to all the victims of ransomware. So what we started to do was rely on victims to conduct their own investigation, bring in those resources that they needed to and that they had planned to, and provide us with any indicators or leads that we could take and run with. So I would often tell victims, we want to work from the edge of your network out into the rest of the world, because our job really is finding the bad guys, not unfortunately helping with the mitigation process. So companies have to have a plan. Ransomware actors are out there. This is a recruiting page for the variant that we had here in Boston, which was the Avidon ransomware variant. And they're not only actively engaged in recruiting, but they're actively engaged in brokering access to the networks. They are looking for network attackers to essentially gain access to a network and then hand the network over to the ransomware actors to install and deploy their Avidon ransomware. One of the things we did at the FBI early on, which worked well, especially through the pandemic, was we had kind of
Looks like even the FBI has technical glitches.
Yes, it does.
Are you back with us, Doug? You're muted right now.
Sorry, folks. I'm going to try and just jump back in here. Hopefully that works. So we basically were given the Avedon ransomware variant because it was not a geographic. We didn't have a geographic solution for this problem. It doesn't affect the geography. Makes no difference, which is what the FBI relies on, specifically because we have to go to the Department of Justice in those districts and get prosecutors to charge our case. When they do that, they need to have venue in that district. So for me to have a victim of Avedon in Boston means that I can go to the District of Massachusetts and charge that crime out of this district. So it is a little bit, it's not built to charge ransomware. I think you've seen a lot of our executive management provide that in some recent interviews, is that, arresting ransomware actors may not ultimately be how we deter them, but it's what we have to work with, and it's the authorities that we're kind of given. When we do talk to a victim, what we were looking for was, indicators of compromise, as many of everyone here might be familiar with. How did they gain initial access? What did they use for credential theft? Did they move laterally, and what tools did they have to do so? How did they gain persistence? Was there malware dropped on there? Was there a backdoor that was open and identified? And then what was the payload? And can we have a copy of it? And what we learned early on, and this illustration from Microsoft does a good job of showing that what I mentioned earlier about the network access was very important to the ransomware's success. And the reason that it was successful was that they could rely on a hacker to gain access and then license the variant, the ransomware variant, and deploy it on the network. And now the victim is dealing with the variant. They don't really know who the network attacker was, but when they're providing indicators to us, they're giving us indicators of the attacker, not of the ransomware group. So what we found is what we didn't intend to do in the first place, which is that we were finding that the FBI investigations were crossing over into other variants, because successful network attackers that we called affiliates were essentially brokering access that they had gained and providing it to the highest bidder of the ransomware variant. So our method proved to be a little bit difficult to deploy and to manage all the ransomware, and it essentially became another big bowl of spaghetti for us, all the investigators, to try to track down where they fit in the problem and how they could provide a solution. But we have had some success. It's not done. The Avedon ransomware case is still ongoing. We've got a group in New York now that's talking to, and we've invited Europol to come talk to us about it. So they're working right now in New York City to try to share information. We've interviewed basically a provider in the Ukraine that was offering services to the ransomware actors that we identified. And we've done this, virtually through the pandemic and through the Ukrainian and Russia war, which has been a recent development that we didn't, we had to kind of plan around and plan through, understanding what those law enforcement officers over there were dealing with. So just a couple more comments. We focused on the most egregious variants because at one time Avedon was the third most prevalent ransomware, and a lot of these variants had similar indicators, and were bringing a lot of investigators to the same people. ALATs, like our FBI colleagues over in the embassies, which aren't staffed like a field office, were getting overwhelmed. Providers that we were working with, especially overseas, were overwhelmed. Prosecutors and what are called CSIPs attorneys that are focused on computer security and computer investigations, there were some choke points. And so we had to rely on our headquarters again to kind of make sure that the most egregious were getting actioned. And then everyone else was kind of queued up behind. So it was a lot of pressure, because we had pressure from the area, the victims, then the people that we protect here in the area, but also from our being told we can't proceed any further. I get questions about paying ransomware. And the answer is that we don't get involved in that decision. But what we try to do is give you as much information as we have on that ransomware variant so that you can make your own decision to pay or not. And then lastly is the Treasury Department released a statement a year ago about warning victims to be careful about paying ransomware actors from their own from their company, and how that might impact them negatively if they end up paying a country that is a sanctioned country. And so there's several countries in the world that the U.S. is forbidden. U.S. companies are forbidden to do business with, and so as these companies became victims of ransomware and were paying ransom wallets, virtual currency wallets to get their data back, the Treasury Department said you have to be very careful about and do your due diligence on what country you're actually paying, because if it's a country like Iran, where we have very strict sanctions about conducting business with, that may prove to be a threat or a risk to your company regarding that sanction. So I wanted to just make sure I pointed that out, and I know I'm running out of time, but the last thing, and I apologize for the graphic picture here, which I took from Forbes.com. But what we're seeing the most of now is what a scam called pig butchering. And what pig butchering is essentially it's a social engineering or fraud kind of introduction to between a victim and a subject or a criminal. And it's very amicable at first. Sometimes it's a romance scam. Sometimes it's an elder fraud scam where they're trying to get someone to invest, and they know that victim might be elderly, and they start to entice them and start talking about cryptocurrency as a good investment. And if you see here with the way that the pig is dissected, what happens is they start going after the victim's life. Their life savings, or that maybe they have a retirement account. They start getting them to trickle money out of it. Then they get the home equity line of credit, and they get them to pay them with that home equity. Then they get their kids maybe trust accounts or college savings, and they take every single bit of money from that victim to invest in a fraudulent crypto currency, whether it's Bitcoin, and they're just transiting the victim through their own website that looks like a legitimate trading platform, or they're coming up with a new crypto token that they want to push and promote to get that victim to invest in it. They've got very believable metrics. They've got financial market dashboards that look legitimate. So when the victim is paying into this company, they are seeing their money that's invested, raised dramatically, and they'll even in kind of a pyramid type of scheme, the subjects, the criminals, will start to trickle money back out to the victim to say, "Hey, look, we got you some money back. Now let's get your home equity, because now this is the golden goose. It's just going to keep on giving you dividends out of it," and the victims get really tied up into it. This is all carried out via WhatsApp. So they'll meet on a legitimate platform, and then they'll ask that the conversation get or moved over to WhatsApp or to another messaging app. So our visibility when we get to the victim is essentially a WhatsApp chat with the subject that is very limiting for us to get involved in. But we have seen apps that are being developed that victims will install. We've seen obviously the login, the account creation. I mean, it opens them up to a whole host of other issues. So I just wanted to provide that as well. And Al, I can turn that back over to you and answer any questions that anyone has.
Yep. No, thanks very much, Doug. That was really interesting. So we do have a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask one now, maybe hold a couple to the end possibly. So you mentioned that you saw a little bit of a downtick, or you mentioned it was a quiet summer. From a perspective of cyber attacks. What's sort of the bigger trend, though? I mean, if you compare where we are today to a few years ago, it increasing? I mean, I think we feel like that's the case. Do you have any data that backs that up, or any sort of comment on that?
We do, and I think it wasn't necessarily quiet, but it was quieter than the previous summer. I think most companies had a plan of action. I think a lot of attorneys were involved and did not want the victims contacting law enforcement because they wanted to maintain the privilege with their client. We got a lot fewer results from the ransomware victims than we had previously, and so we didn't have a lot of evidence that we could move in action in pursuit of the actors. We also we're busy with our investigations from the year prior, because these are years-long investigations, and so we had to kind of be very particular about what we took on extra, and the playbook now is to hire outside counsel to make a claim. I know we've got some insurance professionals on, put a claim in with your insurance company, get things back up and running as quick as possible, and move on and accept the fact that these actors are going to be out there. I don't agree with that entirely, but I do agree that there's some services that companies now need to start thinking about that they maybe didn't really cross their mind 5 or 6 years ago even. As far as data goes, we have an ic3.gov portal that we can receive complaints in. We've got a loss amount of $7 billion throughout 2021, which is the data that's kind of calendar year data from the previous year. And 7 billion in losses is almost the annual budget of the FBI. So our victims are seeing in the tens of millions of dollars of extortion amounts. And the loss amounts are just, you can't stomach it if you think about kind of the big picture, what that means for victims out there.
All right, great, thank you. And that seems like a perfect segue into our insurance conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thank you very much, Doug. That was very informative. I appreciate you taking the time today. Next up on the docket here is Larry Baldino. Larry is the current president of the Cyber Technology and Professional Liability Division at Dual North America. That's a global insurance carrier. Larry has over 20 years of experience in the insurance industry, and the majority of which has been in the cyber and technology and E&O, or errors and omissions space, also referred to as professional liability. Throughout his career, Larry's held various positions in underwriting, management, and product management on both a global and a continental scale. And prior to joining Dual, Larry was part of the cyber and tech E&O team at a major insurance carrier. He also has experience in reinsurance and establishing cyber reinsurance programs. And Larry holds a bachelor's degree from St. Mike's College, my alma mater as well, also a master's from RPI in Troy. So, Larry, there was a couple terms that Doug mentioned, like social engineering, PCAP, and a few other things. You don't need to address that right now, but if you could weave in, some of that stuff, that would be great. I also think that Doug threw up a slide that showed the definition of a cyber attack. And it seems like there might be some differences between what is considered a cyber attack via the FBI, and then what might also be covered under a cyber insurance policy for the consumer. So no need to answer those directly, but if you could weave some commentary into your slide presentation specific to those, I think that might be very informative for the folks online.
Yeah, absolutely, JJ, and thank you very much for the introduction. You did forget one piece on that St. Michael's is called the Harvard of the North, or maybe just I mean, that's just, but anyway, thank you everybody for having me. Like I said, or like JJ said, my name is Larry Baldino. And just real quick, sort of introducing Dual. Dual is a managing general agent. So we work with distributors such as JJ to distribute, very comprehensive cyber insurance products throughout the country and pretty much all over the world. We are an authorized London syndicate. We are based here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Just we've been writing cyber since 2015. Just given kind of a little quick background, as JJ indicated too, I've been in the cyberspace pretty much since 2004. And, you know, the cyberspace has kind of evolved pretty significantly since then. You know, really when at its intro, it was a professional liability policy, and everybody was sort of concerned with media liability and what they were placing on the internet. And it's kind of evolved into a very comprehensive first and third party policy form. And I will share my screen. You see that, JJ?
I do. If you could expand that, that would be great.
Let's how about now? Good.
That looks good. How about you, Al, on your end? Is that full screen?
It's not full screen, no, but sometimes if you have two monitors, you get funkiness like this, so we may just have to make do.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. I'm going to skip right over that. Like I said, that's kind of a brief intro. So, you know, essentially, when I started these presentations a long time ago, I really was like, why buy cyber and who should buy cyber? Well, really, as you know, our friend Doug just demonstrated, everybody needs a cyber insurance policy. And again, it's not just for the liability clauses that it was, you know, once in the beginning, but now it is, you know, really a first and third party expense policy. So what I mean by that is, and here's where we go to JJ's first question about the definition of cyber. Yeah, the cyber insurance definition for what is covered on a cyber policy is slightly broader than, say, you know, what the FBI defines as a cyber attack. So, you know, it's basically designed to protect an organization against threats related to data breaches or your multimedia activity. So again, you know, advertising injury, publishing over the internet, you know, disclosure of private information or sensitive information of a competitor, stuff like that. Stuff that really doesn't fall into, you know, the criminal definition of a cyber attack, but they're still covered on a cyber insurance policy. So again, first party are the costs that you directly incur when responding to a cyber event. So, you know, just picking ransomware for an example, you know, these are incident response costs. So the forensics, the breach coach, you know, the data recreation, stuff along those lines. We'll go into a little highlight of what the cyber policy does as well. And then third party costs, just like every insurance contract, these are the liability costs. So any suits that may arise out of a data breach. So just really high level, you know, so what does a cyber policy cover on the first party side? So, you know, I mentioned a few of them in the beginning, but business interruption, for instance, this works very similar to a commercial property policy. Basically, when your network is shut down, when you're compromised and you are out right now, and, you know, it pays for the expenses and, you know, revenue that you have lost during that time period. There is also a contingent BI coverage, which essentially is the same thing. It's business interruption, but it's done at a trusted provider. So think if your IT services go down, which causes an outage on your network, and think of the, you know, costs associated with that. Digital asset destruction, that is also, you know, the cost to recreate data. So think in the ransomware event, where data is lost and you potentially have to recreate it. Reputational BI, similar to contingent BI and first party BI. Basically, it's loss of income related to the reputation of your firm. So when you are hacked, when you're breached, we've seen a precipitous drop in a lot of clients for return customers, for customers using their network again, for customers even going into the store if you're a retail operation. And these are sort of adjusted here. Obviously, cyber extortion, incident response, we talked about those a little bit. That's basically coverage for ransomware or the threat of ransomware that potentially can shut down your network. And here is where working with a qualified breach coach, it is determined whether you should or should not pay a ransom. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider. Hopefully one thing with the insurance policy is, you sort of go over what kind of controls you have in place. And, if you're deploying multi-factor authentication, if you're, backing up your data, encrypting it, putting it offline, hopefully that all weighs into some of your decisions going forward. Loss of funds, this sort of gets to what JJ was referring to with social engineering. We're seeing quite a bit of these claims today in terms, this is actually the second leading loss leader in the insurance market. The first in the last 24 months has been ransomware that we had just talked about. However, we also do see a lot of phishing schemes, social engineering, which basically are legitimate emails sent to an employee asking you to pay a invoice, and they pay this invoice, which sometimes mirrors legitimate customers, legitimate operations. They go to pay the invoice, and it's actually a different routing number, so you end up paying a bogus, a criminal actor. So we do see a lot of social engineering today. Again, that right now is our second leading business email compromise and social engineering loss. So we are seeing quite a bit of that activity going on.
Larry, do you mind if I add one comment to that for you?
Anybody who has questions, feel free. This is a very free-flowing discussion.
I think it's important to note, as it relates to insurance, specific to social engineering, that it is a coverage that has kind of evolved as digital kind of challenges have evolved. And social engineering is not necessarily automatically included in all of your typical and traditional crime coverages. And so what I have seen as an insurance professional locally and regionally and in many places is that this particular coverage is identified, sublimited, or specifically excluded under most insurance policies, unless a broker, agent, or advisor specifically requests the coverage because it's not traditionally covered under a normal crime or theft policy. I figured it was apropos to bring that up right now. And I think the fact that you're seeing lots of claims take place, I'd be curious if you have any data on what is and is not covered, and how many of the individuals or victims are able to secure insurance protection. And maybe that's more Doug's domain.
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. Well, so it has become a fairly routine it's a fairly commonplace coverage on a cyber policy. And, we do ask a lot of questions on controls, centered around segregation of duties. Are there controls in place if you're authorizing payments over $5,000, for example, is a typical question. Is your email inbox scanned? So, there are some technologies out there that, Alan can probably speak to, that sort of help identify whether an email address is a known email address or a potential fraud email address. I think everybody has probably seen this today where, you get an email from the CEO saying, please, I'm on the golf course right now. We're doing some year-end financials and I need, the top 5 performers. I need all of their financial information emailed to me right now. And then you look at the email address and it has a very nefarious domain. So, I think it's pretty, like I said, it's pretty common, and insurance companies are sort of underwriting around it. The sublimit generally runs between 50,000 and 250,000. There are traditional crime policies that will cover it, but you have to specifically ask to cover it. So, and what we're talking about in the terms of coverage, like I said, is a lot of that dummy invoice where you voluntarily have parted ways with your funds. This is why, JJ, that a lot of times it's not covered on a traditional crime policy, because when you think of traditional crime insurance, you think of an employee or a third party sort of stealing funds or brute force hacking into your bank account and taking funds, like a funds transfer fraud. You'll find coverage like that, on a traditional crime policy, but you're not going to find that, you're not going to find the sort of voluntarily parting, and it's due to a scheme, and even this latest phenomena of pig butchering is starting to become fairly rampant. We're starting to see some claims from that. One thing I would just add to what Doug said is we've noticed a lot of this coming from LinkedIn too, where they start the conversation on LinkedIn, and then, as Doug indicated, they ask you to go to the WhatsApp and move on from there. So, it's really sort of a concerning threat, and it's one that's pretty difficult to sort of defend for. So we see from an insurance perspective, because some of the other attacks, through our data and what we've looked at in the past, we found that with certain controls being put in place, which we can talk about what typically is required to purchase insurance, that has mitigated, and you're starting to see a mitigation in the ransomware pandemic, I guess is the best way. It's going from more of a pandemic phase to an endemic phase. We'll never be out of ransomware, but we will be learning to manage it more appropriately as different malware and different strains come on.
Okay, thank you. So takeaway, really, for anybody who's here, is reach out to your insurance advisor or other key advisors to make sure that the social engineering piece is contemplated. I can tell you internally here at Berkshire Fairfield, within our team meetings and whatnot, we make it a priority to review on an ongoing basis every renewal that pops up because of the emerging social engineering threats that are out there. So ask the question if you're not confident if you have that protection in place already.
Yep. That's an excellent point. Social engineering. You want to also really, I went back to the screen on some of these first party expenses, because you really do want to make sure that your policy is comprehensive enough to to withstand a potential large scale incident. So, I challenge everybody to think about what would happen if their system was compromised and locked out for ransom. Now, full disclosure, I am in the midst of a catastrophic email failure here It was not a nefarious attack. It just was a server function issue. We do have a headquarters in Naples, Florida. So, we are dealing with some of the fallout from that. And our server went down, and we basically lost Friday to today and ongoing. And we're trying to rebuild everything. So think about some of those challenges, what you would, what you'd have. And so I really do recommend that, it has full limits for all the business interruption coverages. Everybody does key in on the extortion and the incident response. One thing I would say is we also, really the more expensive part of some of these cyber incidences when it relates to ransomware are the incident response expenses, like the forensics, and of course the business interruption, the shutdown, your networks. Recreating data too can be very, very expensive. I mean, we're seeing an average. This is a broad average, but if you're looking at SMEs under 50 million in revenue, you're looking at about a minimum of $600,000 to recover from some of these cyber attacks, all up. So while extortion is important, it really is only one piece of the puzzle.
So Larry, a couple questions here, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that I think, we sort of see from our vantage point, which is we're not insurance experts, obviously, but we work with our clients and we want to make sure that they're properly covered. And, we want to be properly covered. And so the trends that I see are that, cyber insurance is getting more expensive. It's getting more difficult to get. There's being more scrutiny put on claims. And, there are more very specific requirements that insurance companies are putting in order to write that coverage. And I feel like that's the big shift that I've seen from where I sit over the past few years. I'm just curious if you would agree with that and have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. So not to go too big into sort of an actuarial review of things, but essentially, as with all insurance coverages, the industry, it took a long time to find a way to sort of price insurance coverage right. And we built a lot of actuarial models over the years that were based on professional liability with some, suspects of there's some pieces and snippets of property modeling when it came to business interruption and so that. So what we found when the perfect storm sort of happened, which was 2019, what we found, that's when ransomware really sort of became a commoditized, offering, where it used to be very expensive to deploy, and you had to target an organization specifically, understand their controls, and then deploy, very specific malware, and it was very pricey to do. But ransomware as a service, or like you see here, rise of hacking as a service, and then obviously cryptocurrency helped facilitate all of that. So 2019, we started to see ransomware tick up. We weren't asking the right questions. We weren't properly pricing for it as an industry whole. And that's when, we started to see loss ratios starting to go over 100%, meaning, we were losing 42 cents for every dollar we were bringing in premium, which, is unacceptable. So that's why we started to see this huge, pivot in pricing, in limits management, in the scrutiny of controls, because what we started to learn is, not only were we going to underwrite based on the industry, the class, the size, all those metrics that we traditionally do. Now we want to know things about your network. Are you deploying multi-factor authentication? Are you backing up your data every night offline and encrypting it? What our studies have found, and I've gone through 22 years of actuarial data, looked at BitSight, all these scoring tools, And the correlation I found is you deploy those two things, multi-factor authentication at all access points, not just your remote, and you encrypt your data and back it up offline, you basically turn a fatal car accident into a fender bender. It's like having a seatbelt plus an airbag and all that. So, that's why you're starting to see the industry sort of scrutinize that, ask for more controls. You may even get scanned in the underwriting process. You'll see some of these digital scannings coming, which are basically, not inside the firewall, but they're snapshots of your network. And it'll tell you how many open ports and configured, IP addresses, and are there any adjacencies and stuff like that. And that is really because the industry is starting to, work with technology services to figure out where the threats are to your individual network. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's what we're seeing is the application process is much more sophisticated, a lot more detailed. There are some, check marks that if you can't check the box, you're probably not going to get coverage. We're seeing things like endpoint detection response software, EDR software being almost mandated at this point, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar with EDR, it's kind of like the next generation antivirus, in a really simplistic way.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I hear you and agree with all of that. And, and Doug touched on this and you just touched on it as well. And I think one of the game changers here is that, cyber criminals have become better organized, and there's a whole dark web economy around, cybercrime. And so you don't have to be a hacker, and you don't need those millions of dollars to invest in your ransomware. You can buy it. It's almost like a franchise. Doug sort of touched on that a little bit, and I think that's one of the things over the past few years that has really accelerated the threats that are out there.
Yeah,
So,
and just real quick, we are starting a lot more conversations with people like Doug. There's a organization called InfoGuard, which is essentially a public-private partnership. We share a lot of data with the FBI. Whenever a ransomware claim comes in, our breach coach does notify the FBI. And our IR firms, our incident response firms, and everybody work closely with law enforcement where it's needed.
Yep.
So we're all getting better, and like I said, it's constant. The threat environments are constantly evolving, but we're getting more on top of it, I guess.
Yep. So, and that's a great segue into our next speaker, who I'm very, very, by the way, thank you, Larry. That was really great, very interesting. Our next speaker, Danny Jenkins, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called ThreatLocker. And we've gotten to know ThreatLocker a bit here over the past year. I can tell you that, we feel like their technology is a game changer when it comes to protecting our clients from, all things bad. It takes a really different approach than I think a lot of us are used to. I'll let Danny sort of dive into that for you, but just to sort of give you a little bit of intro on Danny. As I mentioned, he's the CEO and co-founder of ThreatLocker. They're a cybersecurity firm providing zero trust endpoint security. He's a leading cybersecurity expert. I've seen Danny talk a few times at conferences, and I'm really happy to have you here, Danny.
Thank you, Alan, for having me. Sorry, I just lost my voice. So it's probably worth starting, before I show you any slides, just talking about what I've done in the past and how we really came to thinking about the world in a zero trust approach. My background is in corporate IT, enterprise IT, and back in the old days, it wasn't cybersecurity, it was IT security, which was part of IT. And then it became cyber as its own speciality, if you like. 20 years I've been dealing with malware, viruses, and the viruses have got a lot worse. And a lot of my career has been recovering from cyber attacks. So coming in as a consultant to help companies cover from cyber attacks, but also acting as a white hat hacker to see if I can get into companies, to see if I can get into hospitals and to financial companies. And the answer is, by the way, yes, always. And not because I'm some genius, but because everyone thinks they're really secure, but they're not. And, I remember going into a hospital once and they said, no one can get on our network. We've got everything. And, within half an hour, I had access to patient files. And it was simply because I was able to access a USB port in the hospital on the front desk, actually. It was very, very simple. But I think that probably the most important thing for me was the recoveries. And in 2014, I changed the way I thought about cybercrime. Because before 2014, my thought on cybercrime was, hey, if you're Bank of America or if you're a big organization, the US military, you need to really shore up your defenses. If you're a small business, you have to think about malware, you have to think about pop-ups, you have to think about PCs running slow, but you don't really have to think about someone taking you out of business with cybercrime. And in 2014, I'd been brought in to help with a ransomware recovery for a small business in Australia. And this is, I'd seen ransomware before, but not at the scale. In this case, the guy had paid $22,000 in ransom, which is pretty small by today's value. But he paid $22,000 in ransom and he didn't get his data back. They gave him a key, it didn't work. Basically, he sits there. So this is actually, it's an insurance broker. So this is an insurance company or insurance broker. And they, about a week into the recovery, we're doing hard, low-level disk recovery on the drives. We're trying backups. The backups were all gone because these guys had been in the system. They'd wiped everything out. And the owner of this company called me up, and he was a 60-year-old man, and he was crying on the phone to me. And at that point, I thought, how, he's saying, what can you do? Please help me. And we're doing everything we can. Look, the company didn't go out of business. We managed to recover enough data. Don't get me wrong. It was painful for them, but we did manage to recover enough data after a few weeks. But this guy was basically pleading with me. His voice was shaking, was essentially crying on the phone. He's a 60-something-year-old man because his business has gone. And I realized that, crap, this isn't a Bank of America problem anymore. This is affecting every single small business in the world. And if we think back to 2000, 2001, the most malicious malware in the world, the most notorious malware, I remember the headlines on the newspaper was the love bug. And the love bug virus was a virus that literally, when you opened it, it emailed all of your contacts with the same virus and it said, I love you. And we'd gone from that to someone losing their business or nearly losing their business over essentially somebody opening an email attachment, downloading an executable and installing something on their machine because the user thought they got an email saying your computer's infected, you have to install this link, which seemed pretty obvious they shouldn't have done that. But the user said, oh, this is from the IT department. I have to install this to get the viruses off my machine. And it actually got onto their network and put full crypto locker. Now, at this point, we've gone through, and I know you mentioned EDR, and I'll share my screen at this point. I'm not going to go slide by slide, but I'll show you. I'm just going to, sorry, see if I can get this screen aligned. But essentially, what we've gone through over the last 2 decades is nothing's changed in that 2 decades ago, we couldn't stop malware. We couldn't stop viruses. The love bug got in, the blaster virus got in, we got pop-ups on our machine, people's machine went slow, we got botnets that would send spam emails. I remember the days that small businesses, mail servers would become open relays to send Viagra emails and things like that. And they were all bad and they were a nuisance. And as a managed service provider, your job was essentially cleaning up the mess from that, most of the work. But then it got much more serious because it's not the love bug anymore. It is malware. And there's something else it's not as well. It's not an enthusiast writing malware for fun. This isn't a guy who said, cool, I don't like Microsoft anymore. I'm going to break your shit. And we're going to do this so we can prove we can. These are organized businesses. And they're not always, I mean, the FBI are focusing on organized gangs and variants of common ransomware. But a lot of ransomware we see isn't a common variant. They'll literally go into your machine. They'll get you to open a Word document, which will turn on BitLocker. And encrypt your files with a Microsoft tool. So we're not seeing variants. We're seeing very, very targeted and specific attacks, and they're being coordinated. And we're a business, and we have sales quotas. We have targets. Our support desk have to close so many tickets. We have to get so positive ratings. And these cyber criminals are essentially exactly like that. They are organized businesses with targets and quotas, and it's someone's job to find open RDP servers. It's someone's job to find vulnerable Exchange servers, and they go out and they look for this and they look for it to happen. And what's happened over the last 2 decades is we've seen this revision of what I like to call threat detection, but essentially the next generation of antivirus go over and over and over again. And we've gone from antivirus to AV 2.0 to AI to some magic whatever code in the box to EDR, MDR. And these are all very important technologies to try and detect viruses. But the problem is we're still missing the mark every single time. So what we did is we really said, well, let's go and look back and really focus on malware and what malware is. And malware is often seen as this bad program that you need to detect, but malware is just software. And I'm not going to dive too technically into this, but I'm a software developer among other things. And I've written malware myself, and you write it exactly the same as you do software. And when you reverse engineer a lot of malware, it's written in the same languages. You can sometimes even find examples that someone's copied from Stack Overflow on how to encrypt files. Because if you go onto the internet and you say, hey, I want to encrypt a file with C# in Google, you get an example. And that example isn't there for you to write ransomware. It's there so as a developer, you can encrypt your data so when somebody can't steal it. But attackers have taken that same software and turned it into, or samples and turned it into malware. And the way that malware is being distributed today is two ways. One is, and this still happens, and my slides got distributed spelled wrong, so I apologize for that in advance. One is it through users downloading software, and that's still happens today. And I don't understand how, because we spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars training our staff not to do things. And we're a technology company, and they still click on those emails and they still download things they shouldn't. I put something in our teams, group teams, and I said, can everyone run this on their machine urgently? I wanted to see who was going to run it. And, it was from my Teams account, but nobody knew that my phone wasn't compromised. Someone hadn't got my Teams. And about 20% of our company went, I didn't open anyway because we block software, but I wanted to see how many people would actually click on that just because it came from me as the CEO of the company. And I was surprised that people will just click on software, they'll run software. And that software can be that they're being social engineered. So somebody will send them an email, pretend to be the IT department, but it can also be that a user tries to download a Bitcoin miner or some kind of free software to do something cool. I need to jailbreak my iPhone, or I need to unlock my iPhone that I forgot my password for. And users will just run that software on their machine thinking they're doing something good. And what they don't realize is that actually has malicious software attached to it. The other way that software is being distributed is through vulnerabilities. And I listened to the conversation about the attacks going down this summer versus last summer. I think if you just look at summer as a whole, that's probably not even inaccurate. And the reason being is there was one major attack last summer, and I won't go into details of vendors, but a piece of software was exploited that hit thousands and thousands of small businesses on the 4th of July weekend. So that made this huge spike last summer in ransomware attacks. But generally speaking, we see ransomware attempted attacks every single weekend. Holiday weekends are always worse because people go home longer, so it gives cyber criminals a longer time. But what they're doing is, using vulnerabilities as well to get in there. And last summer, there was a huge vulnerability. And I want to show you a little video of a recent vulnerability, which is the Microsoft Felina vulnerability. And hopefully everyone can appreciate this. I'm a technical person. I know if I get a Microsoft Office document and I open it and it says to me, enable macros, I'm clicking no. I'm not enabling macros. But if I get a document, as far as I'm concerned, opening an Office document without enabling macros is a relatively safe process. So if I'm in the recruiting department and someone sends a resume and it's a Word document, that's good. That's normal business process. If one of my customers sends me a Word document, I'm probably going to open it. Like if I'm doing business with lawyers and they send it, I'm going to open it. Even if it came from a virus, I wouldn't know it, just open it. Now, if it suddenly says, hey, do you want to enable macros? I'm going to say no. It's not 1997 anymore. Macros aren't common use, but a lot of users do. Now, this was slightly different. Last month, this is the second time this has happened in a year, similar vulnerabilities. There was a vulnerability, I'm trying to figure out how to play this, in Office. Hopefully that plays there. And basically what it did is when you could attach malicious code into a Word document. Now, this is a normal Word document with no macros and no anything. When I open this Word document, and it literally, to show you how easy this was, I heard about the vulnerability. I asked our technical team to see how dangerous it was. And within 10 minutes, they had this Word document. You open the Word document. You don't have to click enable content. You don't have to enable macros. Immediately, the document crashes. Office crashes, which is a pretty common process in Office anyway. Now, what's actually happening here in the background is when Office crashed, it called the Microsoft Diagnostics tool, which called PowerShell, which then downloaded this executable called boo.exe, which immediately starts uploading the data. Now, I ran this on a machine 3 days after Microsoft release with an EDR, with antivirus, and it ran clean ran, and it was able to exploit Office in this way. And the reason being is because this vulnerability was a 0-day vulnerability. It downloaded an unknown piece of malware, which is our sample malware, and it ran that, and it wasn't blocked. Now, these are difficult because as a user, you don't know, you didn't do anything wrong here. You did everything normal. You get a resume, you're in the recruitment department, you open it. Now somebody has a foothold on your computer. In this case, the foothold's right up in your screen. But we could have done this hidden. We didn't need to, we could have shown them a resume and literally they wouldn't know any difference that something bad happened. We would just now have a foothold on their machine. We could get into their machine. We can start extracting data. We can start encrypting data. And then we can start looking for backups, because normally these attackers want to spend a little bit of time making sure they get your backups. They upload your data. So if you do say, hey, I'm not paying the ransom, they go, here's the data on the dark web. And it's very, very simple. Now, I'm not going to get into code too much, but literally it was 5 lines of code here, PowerShell command inside the Word document that required, that's all that was required to attack that. And any IT person that's managed to get through the most basic education could figure out how to do this. So you've got millions and millions of people worldwide who can do this, not just enhanced hackers, basic IT people, basic IT staff that have very little experience. Now, the other type of vulnerability is the one that's a little bit more scary, because in that case, you have to what I call ingest data. So you have to open something that's got the malicious payload in it. And there's 2 ways vulnerabilities can happen. One is you can ingest data. The other one is it can be pointed at remotely. So when we think about the Exchange vulnerability, this is even more terrifying, because this February, a customer of mine called me up, and I'm going to show you a screenshot in a moment of that. And he said to me, hey, you guys saved me from this major cyber attack. And I said, oh, did we? And this guy's pretty enthusiastic. So I was like, are we sure it was really major? Like, I know, I appreciate you saying, you pumping us up saying that we're great, but what really happened? So he sent me on the log, and what happened was a file blocked, and we took that file and we copied it into our lab. And he had a vulnerable Exchange server. Now, Exchange, just like the Office vulnerability, was 0-day. In this case, the server wasn't patched because the MSP had just taken on the customer that week. They deployed throughout Locker, and they were bringing their patches up to date. So the vulnerability was 6 months old, hadn't been patched. What happened was, we were able to point at an Exchange server publicly on the internet, because all Exchange servers are on the internet, and we were able to push a piece of malware onto that Exchange server, which ran a PowerShell command and created what's called a group policy. Now, group policy is a way in Windows to push software to every device in the company. So directly from Exchange, within 2 hours, attacking it with this malicious payload, we were able to push ransomware to every single device in the company. Now, it doesn't matter how good your cyber insurance is, or how good your recovery processes is. Think how bad that is if you come in on a Monday morning and every laptop is unusable, every desktop, every server, every backup server in your organization is encrypted in one go. Now, these are the vulnerabilities that are more terrifying to me, because these are the ones that tend to happen over the weekend, because it gives them a lot more time to get in. They can just point at something on the server and they can harden it. Now, the other thing is these attackers are using is they're using good software. And so the most common one is remote access tools. So one of our MSPs sent me an email thanking me for blocking good software. And I didn't understand what the email meant. So I called them, because that's all it said, one line, because sometimes IT people don't like to explain what they're talking about. And I said, what do you mean? Well, he got a request from one of his clients. A client was on a website, one of the users, and look, people are valuable. They make mistakes. So they're on a website, there's a pop-up come up, an ad saying your computer's got 500 viruses on it, and call this 1-800 number to speak to somebody at Microsoft. They called this 1-800 number. They spoke to a very nice man in India who said it was from Microsoft and said, yes, you've got viruses on your computer. I need to get on to remove them. So this guy sent them a go to assist link, which is legitimate IT support software. And the user tried to run it. Now, when you operate in a zero trust basis, and I'm going to dive into that more, you deny everything by default. So you don't allow in your organization everything to run, you deny it by default. So what happened was this remote access software was blocked and the user requested it. The MSP called, because MSPs are there to help you. The advantage of using MSP is they're the skill set behind, well, what it should be in your environment and what shouldn't be, because the average user might not know this is Microsoft, this isn't Microsoft. So the MSP called the user to say, why are you trying to install remote access software? And the user said, it's okay, I'm on the phone to Microsoft. They're helping me fix my viruses. So Microsoft aren't that nice, and they don't use Citrix software for remote access. So they were able to stop it. Now there's another one that people often don't think about is backup software. Now backup software is the best way to recover from a ransomware attack. So when you think about how do I recover myself from ransomware, now if they take your data and they publish it on the web, that's different. But backup software, good backup software is your lifeline to your data coming back. The problem is it's also the way that attackers use software. If we go back to that Office document, in that case, we ran a piece of malware called boo.exe. But in the same line, we could have downloaded backup software and ran that backup software pre-configured to back up all your data to the internet. And your antivirus isn't going to blink twice because it's seeing legitimate software. So suddenly you've got a Veeam or a Kronos or some backup software that's intended for good reasons, backing up to somebody else's cloud, and all your files are slowly trickling out to the internet with no egress alarms. And we're seeing this more and more. And literally you opening a Word document could involve your data being backed up to someone else's store. Now, if we want to think about how to stop this, there really is a very simple answer. And the answer is, whether it's malware, whether it's backup software, whether it's remote access tools, just allow what we need and block everything else. So antivirus works on the basis, or EDR works on the basis that we allow by default and we block by exception. But if you change your business mentality to allow or deny by default and allow by exception, what that means is, one, your users can't allow remote access tools on their machine and do things that could open backup software in Word documents, because all of that's going to be blocked. But it also means zero-day malware is going to be blocked, whether it's known or whether it's not known. Because if it's not known, EDR can't block it. But if you block everything by default, it cannot run. Now, the way to do this is you have to have an MSP behind you, making sure they're monitoring what's being requested. And then the user, if they want to introduce new software, which is very rarely people introduce new software into an environment, they can hit request. Something like 70% of requests that come in to our portal are denied. So just think about that. 70% of the times the user got this pop-up, said, oh, I actually want this software, requested it. The IT professional said, this is bad software. Why are you running this? So, it could be bad in the terms of that it's a coupon clipper that has access to your passwords and there's a business risk associated with that. Or it could be bad that it's actually ransomware running. Now, this isn't difficult. And when you work with an MSP, they're able to help you set this up, go through a learning process, review your policies for you, and make sure everything is happening. So all you really know is an agent gets deployed, your MSP in the background makes everything work smoothly. Now, in the case of that Exchange vulnerability, which was the most terrifying vulnerability I've seen, and when he said, when the customer called me to say, you saved our ass, I thought he was overstating the situation. But when I looked at this denied and we went through the process, we checked, was it no malware? It wasn't no malware on any antivirus, but when we ran it in our testing environment and it encrypted every machine, it was one batch file that made the difference between everything running and not running. The other thing you have to worry about is these vulnerabilities. So we saw the Office vulnerability, but last year, these were newsworthy vulnerabilities. These made CNN, Fox News, all the top news sites, and they were talked about. And that was the SolarWinds Exchange, the RMM in the summer of last year, Office vulnerabilities, another Office vulnerability, Log4j, all of these made the news and they were really big. But here's the thing, that 6 vulnerabilities made the news. All of these pieces of software have access to all of your data. So if you're running SolarWinds, if you're running Exchange, it can see all your data. So if they're vulnerable, an attacker can potentially see all your data. There was over 21,000 vulnerabilities last year that didn't make the news. So 21,000 CVE articles created for vulnerable software that can be used against you. So we have to do 2 things. For a vulnerability to be effective, it has to do something on your machine, and it can either ingest data like that Word document, or it can be like that Exchange server where somebody points at it and actually executes a malicious payload. If you've got a vulnerable version of Office and you don't open any external documents and your computer's not on the internet and you don't take things in, that's not going to be exploited. Like if you're opening documents, if you're browsing the web, if your server's on the internet, if your people can access things from phone, they're exploitable. So an attacker has to either send you a malicious payload or connect to something, and they have to either run something bad, so back to the or potentially even good, like a backup software, or they have to use something fileless, because they can't just say, oh, here's a vulnerability, I'm going to not exploit it. They have to do something to exploit it. So they're either going to run an executable or they're going to use some kind of fileless exploit. Now, I'm going to avoid as much as I can. And if Alan, if you think I'm going too deep, tell me to bring it up a level, please. But there's something in Windows called PowerShell. And there's lots of other tools in Windows, RegServe, CScript. And PowerShell is an IT person's best friend, because it allows them to do things on your machine, to update your machine, to make sure certain settings are set, to run scripts and things like that. But it's also an attacker's best friend, because you can do a lot of things with it. Fileless vulnerabilities, in the case of that Felina vulnerability, I was able to use PowerShell to download boo.exe and run boo.exe on my machine. Now that boo.exe will be blocked when you're using allow listing, when you're only allowing what you need and blocking everything else. But I could have, as an attacker, just use PowerShell to upload your data to the internet, to turn on BitLocker. I could have done different things in PowerShell to just allow you access, to gain access. So in addition to controlling what can run in your environment, you need to make sure you control what it can do. Because here's the thing, you probably have about 500 applications on your computer, whether you know it or not. You're using your camera right now. There's an application that's required to use your camera. You open your browser, there's extensions in your browser. There's driver support apps, there's security software, there's a notepad, there's loads of different applications on your machine. All of those applications, all 500 of those applications can see all of your data. So when you download Angry Birds from the internet and you play it on your machine, I'm not saying Angry Birds is bad. If Angry Birds is to get compromised or get angry one day and decide to eat your data, it can. There's nothing that stops it from seeing your data. It can see all of the same files you can see as a user. And that doesn't matter if you're an admin or not, it can still see them. So what we can do, in addition to controlling what can run, and what your MSP can do, is they can go through the apps that are running and they can define what they can do. So we can say things like Microsoft Office is allowed to run, but we don't want it to be able to talk over to PowerShell. Now that's something that as a business owner, you don't want to have to worry about. Your MSP has to worry about that, because if they don't, it's a difference between your data being stolen or not. That SolarWinds Orion breach, now I don't know if anyone followed it, but it's the breach that's got the federal government, really crapping in their pants, to be blunt, because it's used very, very heavily throughout the federal government and no one really knows the damage. But here's the thing, this breach, there was a very simple step to foil it, and that was to stop SolarWinds being able to see your files and go out to the internet. It didn't need to do either of those actions. So by ring fencing it, we're able to foil that breach from happening. Again, as a business owner, not something you want to think about, but something that your MSP should be thinking about, your IT professionals should be thinking about. Now there's another thing, stopping all those programs accessing your files. You've got 500 programs on your computer, and if you search star.exe in your search box, you'll find how many there are. 5 of those programs, 10 of those programs need to see your data. So limiting which can see your data means that if one of those programs is vulnerable or weaponizable, because it doesn't have to be vulnerable, PowerShell can be weaponized without having a vulnerability, it can't see your data and it can't see your files. Now, when we think about those vulnerable servers, by using these technologies, if someone connects to a server and tries to execute an exploit, we harden that server and reduce the risk of an exploit even further. But the challenge we also have is it'd be better if they couldn't even get to your servers, because your servers are on the internet. You've got laptops on the internet. And the problem we have with networking today is we really don't have a network anymore. Or we do have a network. It's called the internet. People are working from home. We're based in Florida here. We've got 200 people sitting in an office, and we got a foot above water flood. All our people suddenly going home, and we're saying, okay, now we've got 200 endpoints sitting on home networks, and we need to make sure those home networks are protected. And the problem is when we put our computers on the internet, we share that network with countries like Russia and China and even Canada, which is the most terrifying of all. We have to share this network, and people can see our laptops, people can see our servers. So the way you deal with this is you use what's called a firewall, and you use it on the endpoint. Back in 1999, firewalls were something that we had at our perimeter. And then the Blaster virus came out in 2002, and Microsoft said, oh crap, let's put a firewall in Windows. And they released a service pack with a firewall in. The problem is with that firewall is two problems. One is it's off too often and there's no centralized management of it. So what happens is your MSP, when they come in, they check your firewalls on and they check every computer individually. And if someone turns it off, they don't know because it's not centrally managed. The other thing is users can open up ports on it. So when you connect to a public Wi-Fi or any Wi-Fi, it gives you this message. Do you trust this network? The answer should always be no. Even if you're in the office, the answer should be no. I don't even know why they pop that message up. We want to stop. Laptops don't need to be connected to by other devices. So the answer should always be no, but the users get the option to click yes. They go home, they say, oh yeah, I trust my house. I trust the 17 light switches and my 14-year-old son not to do anything bad on the internet and things like that. So when they click yes, they're then exposed. What your MSPs can do, and what we're helping MSPs do, is implement network access controls at the endpoint, control what traffic can come into your endpoints and into your servers. But we're doing something even cooler than that. We're doing something called dynamic ACLs. I think the FBI agent was talking about the IoT devices being used as botnets. And that's a big problem because IoT devices don't have any security on. They're on your network. They could be light switches. They could be copiers. They could be CCTV cameras. And very rarely are they looked after from a security point of view. The problem is you share your network with that. So when you plug your computers into your network and you put your servers on your network, all those devices can see your servers. So what we can do is we can create something called dynamic ACL. So we automatically only trust the devices that need to see the servers. So when you're hosting servers, and whether they're on the internet or whether they're on your LAN, you can say only this device can talk to my Active Directory server, and it will update the access control list. It'll update the ACL based on the user's IP address at that point in time. You can also take things off the internet. Now, no insurance company wants to see this on the internet. I know that this one gets scanned automatically, and it's one of the biggest causes of data breaches and cyber attacks is someone opening RDP on the internet. Now, there are proper ways to publish remote services on the internet. Use a VPN, although VPNs can be vulnerable as well. As we saw with Log4j, lots of VPNs. Use RD Gateway with dual factor authentication. Do it properly. But even doing that, there's always the risk of a vulnerability being exploited. So you can use that same zero trust approach, which is basically don't let anything talk to this on the internet except my trusted devices. And those ACLs will automatically be updated based on where your laptop is at a point in time. So even if you're publishing an RD gateway, and you should never publish RDP on the internet, but even if you're publishing a gateway and you've got dual factor, you can harden that gateway by saying only my one trusted device can see it and nothing else can, or my 5 trusted devices or whatever it may be. And it's really important. Now, I know I kind of dive in and I get quite technical on this, but I want to finish up with one thought, because I've seen 20 years now of small businesses trying to protect themselves. And there are 3 ways you can stop most cyber attacks. I mean, there are some exceptions, but most cyber attacks can be stopped in one of 3 ways. And you should be using all 3. 100% you should be using all 3. The first one is the human way. And this is the weakest link all the time. And you should train your users the best as you can. You could make your users go through training, do phishing training, do phishing simulation, do malware simulations. But if I was to send a phishing email to your users and nobody clicked on it, that threat is gone. So we can't control people. We can't guarantee they won't do what they're supposed to, but you should train them and you should use it. The same applies to malware. If I send malware and nobody clicks on it, that threat's gone. The next area, which is this very, very heavily invested area in the small business world, is this idea of threat detection. Now, if we're talking about phishing, threat detection could be that inbox filter that tells you this is a suspicious email, or blocks it because it's a suspicious email. And what that does is that looks for trends of suspicious emails. And I used to run an email security company, and I can tell you, we got 2 complaints every single day. We blocked too much, we didn't block enough. It's very, very hard to find that perfect line of what is legitimate and what is suspicious, because every time you update your detection, the attackers update their attempt. But you can stop a lot of threats by detecting looking for suspicious emails, having web filtering in place, having an antivirus on your endpoint. So if I send that phishing email, I send that malware, If the user doesn't open it, great. But if the user does open it, you have a level of detection. But these are areas where quite often they're not foolproof. And unfortunately, attackers don't need to succeed every single time. They only need to succeed once. So they can just keep tapping at that glass until it breaks. And at some point, your antivirus or your email phishing filter or your web filter isn't going to detect that threat. At some point, your humans, your people are going to click on something. So the area you should be focusing on more than anything else, and I genuinely mean this, is this idea of controls. And controls mean things like, if a user doesn't need access to files, don't give them access to files. You know that that insurance broker that I was talking about at the beginning, you know, the only thing that wasn't encrypted was their payroll in the whole company. And the reason being was because they were sensitive that someone would look at someone else's wages, so they couldn't get it. But there were so many other things in the company that didn't need to be shared, that didn't need access. So if you put controls in place to take away permissions where they're not needed, it makes it a lot harder for an attacker to get data. The other areas are things like allow listing or whitelisting. Don't let software run that isn't trusted. If I send that malware and the human opens it, you have no control over that. You have no control over detection. But if you've got an MSP controlling exactly what software can run, that is a physical, tangible control that you can do something about. Dual factor authentication. The user's going to click on that phishing link whether you want them to or not. You can train them, you can reduce the probability, but at some point, somebody clicks on that phishing link. The detection's going to fail. But if you've got dual factor authentication in place, that is the final control that will stop an attacker being able to run software on your computer. Things like taking away admin permissions. They're not going to stop ransomware taking away admin permissions, but it's going to make it a lot harder for an attacker to bounce around in your environment. So if a user doesn't need to be an admin, take away admin permissions. Control what your software can do. If you think about security like this, if you work with your MSP, if you say, well, what controls can I put in place? How can I take away users' permissions? How can I stop software running that shouldn't run? How can I put firewall and network controls in place so ports aren't open on the internet when they don't need to be, or even on my LAN when they don't need to be? If you do this, it's going to be so hard to get into your business. No one's even going to try because, like I said at the beginning, these guys are businesses. They need to make money. And there is no such thing as unhackable. It's impossible to be unhackable. But what you can do is make yourself so difficult to hack that no one's going after you. No one's breaking into the White House to steal the TV. I mean, the White House isn't impenetrable, but no one's coming in and stealing the TV off the wall because it's so secure. It's not. It wouldn't make any sense to even try and do that. The same applies with your cybersecurity. If you make yourself less hackable, if you put basic controls in place, if you monitor your environment, if you have a good MSP behind you doing this, you're going to be a lot less hackable. And you're probably going to get through the next 100 years of business without cyber events. If you sit there and bury your head in the sand and say, I hope that my antivirus is going to block everything, it's going to happen. And just think about this. Every time you get a piece of malware that's not bad, every time someone gets a pop-up on their machine because there was a piece of malware installed, think if they can install that, they can install ransomware. They can install data theft software. They can install backup software. So just think about that, because at some point you get unlucky. And like I said, the attackers only have to be lucky once. You have to be lucky every single time to make sure your network's protected. I don't know if there's any questions anyone wants to fire at me or...
Danny, that was really, really helpful. And, you know, I think, and we are running a little bit late here, but just to sort of wrap up, you know, I think what you started out with really is what resonates with me and resonates with our clients. It's, you know, a shift from allow everything and deny by default to a shift to deny everything and allow by default. And that change in philosophy is gigantic, you know, because if we think about, you know, the challenge of the EDR software or the antivirus software of the world, it's like this giant game of high-tech whack-a-mole. You know, you block everything, you know, but things pop up all the time. And so, you know, it's virtually impossible to build an EDR system that's going to give you, you know, 100% security. It's just impossible to do. Whereas a whitelisting approach, which says, hey, you know, these are the 75 pieces of software that we need to run, and I don't need to run anything else. And, you know, if we want to make an exception to that, there's a process for vetting that. And it is, like I say, I think it's a real game changer. It's something that we have spent a lot of time investing in terms of researching how we felt our clients can be better protected. And of course everything is balanced by cost, and so things have to be affordable. And so in terms of the value, we find that Threat Locker has been an enormous value and a big benefit to our clients. So I don't have any other questions. I don't know, JJ, do you have any questions for either Larry or Danny? I think you're muted right now.
Apologies for that. No questions. Really just kind of a wrap-up statement, in that it's really a matter of whether people want to be proactive or reactive. And I think if businesses today are proactive and taking really the zero trust approach that Danny has outlined, then it's going to minimize significantly the amount of time that they're going to have to be on a reactive basis in trying to get them back up to operational capacity following a hack. And so I look at what we do every single day as an insurance broker, and I look at general liability. General liability is an insurance terminology that we use. Cyber liability is one that needs to be up there, because I see cyber as the largest emerging threat out there for businesses. That is going to be the standard risk that folks must be experts in, as far as I'm concerned, to the best of their ability. The same way that general liability risk was clearly articulated and now understood by consumers today. This is the new wave of risk, and we, all of us as presenters here, are clearly focused on providing a fluency to our consumers in a way that we haven't before. And certainly, Danny, your risk management process and kind of the way you approach it is certainly kind of the emerging trend in risk management for cybersecurity. So
I think pretty much every standard now, from the obviously the IT Modernization Act to the executive order post the Colonial Pipeline attack, all mandates or heavily suggest that we operate in a zero trust world now, because it's the only way that we're going to be able to succeed. To win this, I mean, and this is going to go away, but this is an ongoing war that's going to go on for the next decade. But it's the only way that you can stay ahead in it.
It's critical for business continuity and for profitability for all business owners moving forward. So, agreed.
Yep, great stuff. All right, well, thank you to our panel for being here. Really appreciate it. Great information. So to the folks in the audience here, just some contact information for JJ and I. We'd love to get your feedback. Shoot us an email. Tell us what you liked, what you'd like to see more of. If this is helpful, this is the kind of thing that we can, do again. And really, our mission here is just to be helpful, to try to educate, to try to help you keep on top of things like this. So we'd love to get your comments, or if you have questions, want to talk about anything else, just feel free to reach out. And once again, thank you to the panel, and I think that's a wrap.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.